The dust from the stagecoach accident still hung in the air like a shroud when Violet Winters crawled from beneath the overturned coach, her dress torn and bloodied, her hands shaking as she reached for her father's lifeless body sprawled among the rocks and splintered wood. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the desolate stretch of road between Hallbrook and Springerville, and all she could hear was the wheeze of dying horses and her own ragged breathing as she knelt beside the only family she had left in this world. Her father's eyes stared unseeing at the brilliant blue sky, and Violet felt something inside her chest crack open like the earth during a drought. She did not know how long she sat there in the dirt, holding his cooling hand, before she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her body tensed, knowing that bandits often circled back to rob the victims of accidents they had caused, and this had been no accident. She had seen the rope stretched across the road just before the driver tried to swerve, had felt the terrible moment when the coach began to tip, had heard her father's shout of warning before the world became a tumbling nightmare of breaking wood and screaming. The rider who came around the bend was not one of the bandits. Violet knew this immediately because he reined in his horse with an expression of genuine shock and dismay, and because he dismounted before the animal had fully stopped, running toward her with the kind of urgency that spoke of a man who valued human life. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in springtime, and when he reached her side, he dropped to his knees without regard for his clean denim trousers. "Madam, are you hurt?" His voice was rough with concern, his hands hovering near her shoulders as if he wanted to help but did not know where to begin. "Can you stand, my father?" Violet heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere far away. "He is gone." The cowboy looked at her father's body, and she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest, and bowed his head for a moment of respect. When he looked at her again, his eyes were filled with a sorrow that seemed too deep for a stranger to feel. "I am sorry. I am so very sorry." "The driver," Violet said suddenly, remembering. There was a driver and a guard. They found the driver with his neck broken, thrown clear of the coach into a stand of mesquite. The guard had been shot, probably during the initial ambush, and Violet realized with a cold clarity that she should also be dead. The bandits had meant to kill everyone and rob the coach at their leisure. Only the timing of this cowboy's arrival had likely saved her from discovery. "We need to get you somewhere safe," the cowboy said, straightening up from examining the guard's body. "Those men might come back. I cannot leave them like this." Violet's voice broke on the last word. "They deserve better than to be left for the buzzards." The cowboy studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a recognition perhaps of her grief, or her determination, or both. "My name is Nathan Northwood. I have a ranch about 5 miles southeast of here. We can bring them there, give them a proper burial." "I have no money to pay you," Violet said, and the admission cost her more than she would have thought possible. "Everything we owned was in the coach, and the bandits took it all before the crash." She paused, looking down at her father's peaceful face. "I must bury him properly. He was a good man." "He deserves that much." Nathan shook his head firmly. "I am not asking for payment. No one should be left in the desert like this. Come on, help me get your father secured on my horse. We will need to come back with a wagon for the others." The ride to Nathan's ranch was the longest 5 miles of Violet's life. She sat behind him on his buckskin gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling, her father's body secured in front of him across the saddle. She could feel the solid warmth of Nathan's back against her cheek, could smell the scent of leather and honest sweat and sage, and she found herself clinging to that aliveness, that proof that death had not claimed everything in the world. The ranch was small but well-maintained, with a sturdy house built of adobe and timber, a barn that had been recently painted, and corrals that held perhaps a dozen horses. A Mexican woman came out of the house as they approached, her face creasing with concern when she saw what Nathan carried. "Madre de Dios," she breathed, crossing herself. "What has happened?" "Stagecoach attack on the Hallbrook Road," Nathan said, dismounting carefully. "Rosa, this is Miss Winters. She needs a place to stay and food if you can spare it. I need to go back with the wagon for the others." Rosa, who could not have been more than 40 despite the gray threading through her black hair, immediately reached up to help Violet down from the horse. Of course. Come, Nina, you are hurt. Let me tend to you." "I am fine," Violet protested, but when her feet touched the ground her knees buckled and she would have fallen if Rosa had not caught her. The older woman made a clicking sound with her tongue and guided Violet firmly toward the house. "You men, you are all the same," Rosa said, shaking her head. "You think being strong means not admitting when you need help. Come now, let me clean these cuts before they become infected." Violet let herself be led inside, but she turned back at the doorway to watch as Nathan gently lifted her father's body and carried it toward the barn. Something in the careful way he held that burden, the respectful manner in which he walked, made tears finally spill down Violet's cheeks. Rosa saw them and made a soft sound of sympathy, guiding Violet to a chair at the kitchen table. The next hours passed in a blur of warm water and gentle hands, of Rosa cleaning the cuts on Violet's arms and face, of whispered words of comfort in Spanish and English. Violet learned that Rosa had worked for Nathan for 3 years, ever since her husband died in a mining accident, and Nathan had offered her a home and employment. She learned that Nathan was 26 years old, that he had built this ranch from nothing after leaving Texas 5 years ago, that he was known throughout the territory as an honest man who kept his word. "He has a good heart," Rosa said, wrapping a bandage around a particularly deep cut on Violet's forearm. "He does not show it much because men in this country think feelings are weakness, but I see it. He brings me wildflowers in spring because he knows I miss my garden in Tucson. He paid for the doctor when the shepherd's son broke his leg and asked for nothing in return. You are lucky he found you." "I know," Violet whispered, and she did know, though the knowledge was tangled up with grief so profound she could barely breathe around it. Nathan returned as the sun was beginning to set, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face grim. "I have them in the barn," he said quietly. "I will dig the graves tomorrow at first light in the grove of cottonwoods by the creek. It is a peaceful place. Thank you." Violet stood, swaying slightly but determined to remain upright. "Mr. Northwood, I need to ask you something." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "Please. Nathan." His name felt strange in her mouth, intimate somehow despite the tragedy that had brought them together. "I need to give my father a proper burial. I need a coffin and a marker with his name. I have nothing to pay you with except this." She held out her hand, and in her palm lay a gold ring set with a small ruby, the metal warm from her skin. "It was my mother's. She died when I was born, and my father gave it to me on my 16th birthday. It is all I have left of either of them." Nathan stared at the ring as if she had offered him a live coal. "I cannot take that. You must." Violet's voice was steady now, strengthened by purpose. "I will not let him be buried without dignity. This ring is worth something. It will pay for the wood and your labor and the markers for all 3 of them. Please, Miss Winters." Nathan looked up at her, and she saw that his eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. "Violet, I will build those coffins, and I will carve those markers, and I will help you lay them to rest with all the dignity they deserve. But I will not take your mother's ring. Some things are not for sale. I have nothing else, Violet said, and her voice broke completely. I have nothing left to give. Please, let me do this for him. Let me give him this one last thing. Nathan crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and took her hand, the one holding the ring, closing her fingers gently around the precious metal. You keep that ring. It is your connection to your parents, and you should not have to give it up. I will do this because it is the right thing to do, not because you paid me. Do you understand? Violet looked up at him, at this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray, and something shifted in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was recognition. This man with his calloused hands and his kind eyes, this man who would give her father dignity without asking for anything in return. This man who understood that some losses were too great to be measured in gold. He was someone rare and valuable in a world that often seemed to contain neither quality. I do not know how I will ever repay you, she whispered. There is no debt, Nathan said firmly. Now come, Rosa has made supper and you need to eat even if you do not feel like it. Tomorrow will be hard enough without facing it on an empty stomach. Violet slept that night in Rosa's room, in a narrow bed that smelled of lavender and clean cotton, and when she woke before dawn, she could hear the sound of hammering from the barn. She dressed in the simple calico dress Rosa had loaned her, her own clothes too torn and bloodstained to be salvaged, and walked out into the cool morning air to find Nathan working by lamplight. He had built 3 coffins from rough pine, each one carefully sanded smooth, each one fitted with a lid that would close tight. He looked up when she entered, his face drawn with exhaustion, sawdust clinging to his dark hair. You have been working all night, Violet said, and it was not a question. I wanted to have them ready. Nathan ran a hand over one of the coffins, checking for rough spots. They deserved to be laid to rest properly. Violet walked closer, her bare feet silent on the dirt floor of the barn. In the lamplight, she could see the care that had gone into these simple boxes, the attention to detail, the respect embedded in every nail. Why are you doing this? You did not know any of them. You do not know me. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his hand still resting on the coffin. My mother died when I was 14, he said finally. We were traveling west, trying to get to California, and she caught a fever. We were in the middle of nowhere, no doctor for 50 miles, and my father and I, we did everything we could, but it was not enough. When she died, my father wanted to bury her right there on the trail, just dig a hole and be done with it. He said we could not afford to wait, that we needed to keep moving. But I would not let him. I made him stop for 2 days while I built her a coffin and carved a marker with her name. He was furious with me, said I was being foolish and sentimental, but I did not care. She was my mother, and she deserved better than to be thrown into the ground like she did not matter. He looked up at Violet then, and she saw the old pain in his eyes, the grief that had shaped him. My father and I, we did not speak much after that. He turned bitter, started drinking, and by the time we reached California, he was someone I barely recognized. I left him there and came to Arizona to start over. But I never forgot what it felt like to fight for her dignity, to give her that one last gift. So when I see someone who needs that same thing, I cannot turn away. I will not turn away. Violet felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she did not brush them away. She was lucky to have you as a son. And your father was lucky to have you as a daughter, Nathan replied. Anyone can see that by the way you grieve for him. They buried the 3 men at mid-morning in the grove of cottonwoods where the creek ran cool and clear. Rosa stood beside Violet and sang a hymn in Spanish, her voice high and pure in the still air. Nathan lowered each coffin into the ground with a gentleness that spoke of reverence, and Violet read from the Bible that had been her father's, the words of the 23rd Psalm trembling on her lips. When it was done, when the graves were filled and Nathan had placed the wooden markers he had carved with each man's name, Violet stood there for a long time with her hand pressed to her chest, feeling the solid weight of her mother's ring through the fabric of her borrowed dress. Nathan had given her this gift, this precious thing that she could not have bought with all the gold in the world. He had given her father peace and dignity, and in doing so he had given her something to hold on to in the midst of her grief. That evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Violet found Nathan standing by the corral watching the horses. She walked up beside him, her hands folded in front of her, and said, "I need to find work. I cannot stay here and take advantage of your kindness without contributing something." Nathan turned to look at her, surprise clear on his face. "You do not need to worry about that right now. You should take time to heal, to grieve." "Grieving will not put food in my mouth or a roof over my head," Violet said practically. "I am alone in the world now, Nathan. I need to be able to take care of myself." "What did you do before?" Nathan asked. "Before you and your father were traveling, we ran a boarding house in Santa Fe. My father managed the business side of things, and I did the cooking and cleaning and tended to the guests. We sold it when he decided we should move to California to be near my aunt." Her voice caught. "We were supposed to arrive next week. Now I do not even know how to tell her what has happened." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant with thought. "Rosa needs help," he said finally. "This ranch is growing, and I have been hiring on more hands. She has been complaining that she cannot keep up with all the cooking and washing by herself. If you wanted to stay and work, I would pay you fair wages, room and board included." Violet felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she had not realized she was carrying. "You would do that for me, even after everything you have already done?" "I would do that for you because you are a hard worker who needs a job, and I need someone who can help Rosa. It is as simple as that." Nathan smiled then, a small, gentle curve of his mouth that made him look younger. "Besides, Rosa has already informed me that if I let you leave, she will never forgive me. She says you have a gift for baking bread, and she has been trying to perfect her own recipe for 2 years without success." Despite everything, despite the grief that sat like a stone in her stomach, Violet found herself smiling back. "I suppose I could stay for a little while, until I figure out what to do next." "Until you figure out what to do next," Nathan agreed, but something in his eyes suggested he hoped that day would be a long time coming. Violet settled into life on the ranch with an ease that surprised her. She rose before dawn to help Rosa prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, learned the names and preferences of each of the 6 men who worked for Nathan, and discovered that the physical labor of cooking and cleaning was a balm to her grief. When her hands were busy kneading bread or scrubbing floors or hanging laundry in the desert wind, her mind could not dwell quite so heavily on what she had lost. Rosa became something like the mother Violet had never known, teaching her how to make tortillas and tamales, how to brew strong coffee that could wake a dead man, how to stretch provisions when supplies ran low. The older woman also told her stories about Nathan, about how he had won the ranch land in a poker game and then worked himself nearly to death to make something of it, about how he had a reputation for being fair and honest in a place where such qualities were often seen as weaknesses. "He is lonely, that one," Rosa said one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "He works too hard, never takes time to go into town and meet a nice girl. I tell him he needs a wife, someone to share his life with, but he says he is too busy building the ranch to think about such things." Violet felt her cheeks warm and bent her head lower over the peas. Perhaps he simply has not met the right person. Perhaps, Rosa agreed, but there was a knowing tone in her voice that made Violet's blush deepen. The truth was that Violet had become intensely aware of Nathan in the weeks since she had come to the ranch. She noticed the way he moved with an easy grace despite his size, the way he spoke gently to the horses and firmly to the men, the way his face softened when he looked at something beautiful like a sunset or a newborn foal. She noticed the calluses on his hands and the laugh lines around his eyes, the way he always removed his hat when speaking to her or Rosa, the careful distance he maintained, as if he was afraid of making her uncomfortable. She found herself watching for him in the mornings, listening for the sound of his voice among the others, looking forward to the evenings when he would come to the house for supper and tell them about his day. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, a way of finding lightness even in difficulty, and when he smiled at something she said, she felt warm all the way through. 2 months after the stagecoach attack, Violet was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran, her heart pounding, memories of the attack flooding back unbidden. When she rounded the corner of the barn, she found Nathan and one of the ranch hands, a young man named Charlie, struggling to control a horse that had gotten tangled in a section of broken fence. The horse was screaming in pain and terror, blood streaming from cuts on its legs, and Nathan was trying to get close enough to free it without getting kicked. Violet did not think, just moved forward, her voice rising in a low, steady stream of sounds that were more feeling than words. The horse's ears flicked toward her, its rolling eyes fixing on her face, and she kept moving forward with her hand outstretched. "Easy now, easy," she murmured, and something in her voice seemed to reach through the animal's panic. "No one is going to hurt you. We are going to help you. Just stay still now. Just stay still." The horse trembled but stopped thrashing, and Nathan used the moment to cut through the fence wire that had wrapped around its legs. The second the horse was free, it tried to bolt, but Violet was somehow holding its halter, her small frame braced against its weight, and Nathan moved quickly to help her control it. "I have got him," Nathan said, taking the rope from her hands. "Step back now." Violet moved away, her legs suddenly shaking, and watched as Nathan led the injured horse toward the barn. Charlie was staring at her with open amazement. "How did you do that, Miss Winters? I have been trying to get near that horse for 15 minutes, and he nearly took my head off every time." "I do not know," Violet said honestly. "My father always said I had a way with frightened things." That evening, after Nathan had cleaned and bandaged the horse's wounds, he found Violet in the kitchen helping Rosa with supper. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her move around the room with easy familiarity before clearing his throat. "I wanted to thank you," he said when she turned to look at him. "What you did today, that horse would have torn himself to pieces if you had not calmed him down." "It was nothing," Violet said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am glad I could help. It was not nothing." Nathan stepped further into the room, his hat turning in his hands. "Violet, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right time, but I do not think there is ever going to be a perfect moment, so I am just going to say it." Violet's heart began to beat faster. Rosa, with the impeccable timing of someone who knew when to make herself scarce, suddenly remembered urgent business in her room and disappeared. "What is it?" Violet asked, though she thought she might know, might hope. Nathan took a deep breath. "You came here because of tragedy, because of the worst day of your life, and I do not want you to think that I am taking advantage of your grief or your situation. But Violet, these past 2 months, having you here, they have been the best months I can remember. You make this place feel like a home instead of just a ranch. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make me want to be better than I am. And I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving your father, but I need you to know that I care for you. I care for you more than I have ever cared for anyone." Violet's throat felt tight, her eyes burning with tears that were not entirely sad. "Nathan, I care for you too. I think I have been falling in love with you a little bit more each day, and I feel guilty because I think I should still be drowning in grief. But my father, he would not have wanted me to stop living. He always said that life was too short and too precious to waste on regret." "So you do not think it is too soon?" Nathan asked, and the hope in his voice made Violet's heart ache. "I think that tragedy has a way of showing us what matters," Violet said softly. "I think that I could have spent years in Santa Fe never meeting anyone who made me feel the way you do. I think that my father would have liked you very much, and I think that maybe something good can come from something terrible if we are brave enough to let it." Nathan crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to take you into town for church socials and buy you ribbons and write you terrible poetry that will make you laugh. I want to do this right." "I would like that," Violet whispered. And when he smiled at her, it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. The courtship that followed was both achingly sweet and complicated by proximity. Nathan did take Violet into Springerville for church socials, where she met the other families who lived in the area, and discovered that Nathan was well respected and well liked. He did buy her ribbons, a beautiful blue set that matched her eyes, and he did attempt to write her poetry that was indeed terrible but made her laugh until her sides hurt. But they also saw each other every day, worked side by side when extra hands were needed, sat together on the porch in the evenings watching the stars come out. It was an intimacy born of shared space and shared work, and it deepened what was between them in ways that formal courtship could not have achieved. One evening in early October, when the desert heat had finally broken and the air smelled of rain that had not yet fallen, Nathan asked Violet to walk with him down to the creek. They stood together under the cottonwoods where her father was buried, and Violet felt a sense of peace that had eluded her since the day of the attack. "I come here sometimes," she said quietly, "to talk to him. I tell him about my day, about the ranch, about you. I think he can hear me." "I am sure he can," Nathan said, his hand warm around hers. "And I hope he knows that I will spend the rest of my life taking care of you if you will let me." Violet turned to look at him, her breath catching in her throat. Nathan was down on one knee, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know we have not been courting very long," he said, "and I know that you have been through so much, but Violet, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you sing to yourself when you think no one can hear. I love how you calm frightened horses and make Rosa laugh and turn a house into a home just by being in it. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life loving you, if you will have me. Will you marry me?" He opened the box, and inside was a simple gold band set with a small diamond. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was chosen with care, and Violet could see her future in it as clearly as if it was already written. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and she felt the solid beating of his heart against her cheek, the strength of his embrace, the promise of safety and love. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, like a prayer of thanksgiving, and Violet kissed him back with all the hope and joy that had been rebuilding in her heart since the day he had found her in the desert. They were married in November, in a small ceremony at the church in Springerville with Rosa and the ranch hands, and half the town in attendance. Violet wore a dress that the women of the town had helped her sew, a beautiful creation of cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers that Nathan had ridden out at dawn to collect. Before the ceremony, Violet went to the grove of cottonwoods and stood before her father's grave. She wore her mother's ruby ring on her right hand, the gold warm against her skin, and she pressed her left hand over her heart. "Papa," she said softly, "I wish you could be here today. I wish you could walk me down the aisle and give me away to Nathan. He is a good man, the best man I have ever known besides you. He reminds me of you in so many ways, the way he values honesty and hard work, the way he treats people with kindness. I think you would have liked him very much." The wind moved through the cottonwood leaves, making a sound like whispered conversation, and Violet smiled through her tears. "I wanted you to know that I kept Mama's ring. Nathan would not let me give it up, even when I had nothing else to offer. He gave you dignity and gave me a future and asked for nothing in return. That is the kind of man I am marrying today. I hope you can be happy for me, wherever you are. I hope you know that I will never forget you, that I will carry you with me always." She stood there for a few minutes more, memorizing the peace of this place, the way the light filtered through the leaves, the sound of the creek running over stones. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, toward Nathan who was waiting for her, toward the life they would build together. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Rosa cried through the whole thing, and Charlie played a fiddle tune that was only slightly off-key. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Nathan kissed her, the whole church erupted in applause and whistles. Violet laughed against Nathan's mouth, her heart so full she thought it might burst, and when they walked out of the church into the November sunshine, she felt like she was stepping into a new world. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. There was dancing and music and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious, and through it all Nathan never let go of Violet's hand. When the sun began to set and the guests finally started to drift away, Nathan led Violet to the house he had built for them, a small structure separate from the main house that he had been working on in secret for weeks. "When did you do this?" Violet asked, amazed. The house was simple but solid, with glass windows and a stone fireplace and furniture that Nathan had clearly made himself. "I have been working on it every night after you went to bed," Nathan admitted. "I wanted to have it ready for you, wanted to give you a home that was just ours." Violet walked through the rooms, trailing her fingers over the furniture, the curtains, the quilt on the bed that Rosa had clearly had a hand in making. In the main room there was a shelf already filled with books, and on the mantel over the fireplace sat a framed photograph that made Violet's breath catch. It was the photograph that had been in her father's luggage, the one of Violet and her parents taken when she was a baby. Somehow Nathan had recovered it from the wreckage of the stagecoach, had kept it safe, had framed it and given it a place of honor in their home. "Nathan," she whispered, turning to him with tears in her eyes, "how did you find this?" "I went back to the crash site a few days after the burial," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I thought there might be something salvageable, something that belonged to you or your father. Most of it was gone, taken by the bandits or destroyed in the crash, but I found this photograph in a leather case that had gotten wedged under a rock. I have been keeping it safe, waiting for the right time to give it to you." Violet threw her arms around him, holding him tight, overwhelmed by the depth of his thoughtfulness. Thank you for understanding what this means to me." Nathan held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I want you to always remember where you came from, who your parents were. They are part of you, part of us now. This is as much their home as it is ours." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed with the stars visible through the window, Nathan traced the line of Violet's jaw with his finger and said, "Tell me something I do not know about you." Violet thought for a moment, her head resting on his chest. "When I was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, I used to sneak out of the boarding house at night and lie on the roof looking at the stars. My father caught me one night, and I thought I would be in terrible trouble. But instead he climbed up there with me, and we spent the whole night making up stories about the constellations. He said that every star was a person who had lived a good life, and that when we died we would become stars too, watching over the people we loved." "That is a beautiful thought," Nathan murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "I like to think he is up there now," Violet said softly. "Watching over us, glad that I found you." "I am glad you found me too," Nathan said, "or that I found you. Either way, I am grateful for it." They fell asleep tangled together, and Violet dreamed of stars and cottonwood trees and a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. The years that followed were not without their challenges. The ranch faced droughts and harsh winters, cattle rustlers and difficult markets. But Nathan and Violet faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Violet proved to have an excellent head for business, taking over the ranch's books and finding ways to stretch their resources further. Nathan expanded the horse breeding operation, developing a reputation for raising animals that were both beautiful and smart. Rosa stayed on, becoming more family than employee, and when she grew too old to do the heavy work, Violet hired additional help without hesitation. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily, and with that prosperity came the ability to help others. Nathan and Violet became known for their generosity, offering work to those who needed it, extending credit during hard times, standing up for what was right even when it was not popular. In the spring of 1884, 3 years after their marriage, Violet gave birth to their first child, a son they named Noah Vincent Northwood. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born he was surrounded by love. Nathan wept when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility and joy, and Violet watched her husband become a father with a heart full of gratitude. 2 years later came a daughter, Grace, who had Nathan's green eyes and Violet's stubborn determination. And 2 years after that, another son, Samuel, who was gentle and thoughtful like his father and fierce like his mother when he needed to be. The house Nathan had built was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the sound of children's laughter filled the rooms and echoed across the ranch. Violet taught her children to read and write, to bake bread and tend gardens, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station. Nathan taught them to ride and rope, to care for animals, to value hard work and honesty above all else. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the work was done, Nathan and Violet would walk down to the grove of cottonwoods where Violet's father was buried. They had added other graves over the years, the ranch hands and Rosa's sister, who had come to live with them in her final years, creating a small cemetery that was peaceful and well tended. Violet always paused at her father's grave, her hand resting on the marker that Nathan had carved all those years ago. "I wish you could see them, Papa," she would say. "They are beautiful and strong and everything I could have hoped for. And Nathan, he is everything you would have wanted for me. Everything I needed. I think he knows," Nathan would say, his arm around her waist. "I think he is very proud of you." One evening when Violet was 35, when the children were old enough to understand, she took them to the grove and told them the story of how she and Nathan had met. She told them about the stagecoach attack, about their grandfather's death, about how Nathan had appeared like an answer to a prayer. "I had nothing left to give him," Violet said, looking at her children's attentive faces. Everything had been taken from me except my mother's ring, and I was willing to give even that up to make sure your grandfather was buried with the dignity he deserved. But your father, he refused to take it. He said some things were not for sale, that he would help me because it was the right thing to do. She held out her hand, showing them the ruby ring that she still wore on her right hand. This ring has been passed down through our family for 3 generations. Your great-grandmother wore it, I wore it, and someday one of you will wear it. But it is more than just jewelry. It is a reminder that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold. Love, dignity, kindness, these are the things that matter. These are the things your father taught me. Noah, who was 14 and already showing signs of the man he would become, said, "Papa wept when you tried to give him the ring, did he not?" That is what Rosa told me. Nathan, who had been standing slightly apart, came forward and knelt down so he was at eye level with his children. "I did," he admitted. "I wept because your mother was willing to sacrifice the last precious thing she had to honor her father's memory. I wept because I saw her love and her pain, and I wanted to take both away from her but knew I could not. All I could do was help her in the way she needed most, and refuse to let her pay for basic human decency." "Is that why you always tell us to help people who need it?" Grace asked, her green eyes serious. "Because someone helped Mama when she needed it most." "That is part of it," Nathan agreed. "But also because it is simply the right thing to do. We have been blessed, and with blessing comes responsibility. We take care of our people, our land, and anyone else who crosses our path needing help. That is how we honor the past and build the future." "I understand," Samuel said quietly, and something in his voice suggested he truly did. As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew into one of the most successful in the territory. Noah took over much of the day-to-day operations as he grew older, showing a natural talent for leadership. Grace surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine, learning from the traveling vet who came through twice a year, and eventually attending veterinary school back east. Samuel became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property for the children of the workers and the surrounding families. Nathan and Violet grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year until it was woven into the very fabric of who they were. They could finish each other's sentences, could communicate with a glance, could sense each other's moods and needs without a word being spoken. It was the kind of love that inspired songs and stories, the kind that people pointed to as proof that true partnership was possible. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Violet back to the grove of cottonwoods where he had proposed. The trees were larger now, their branches spreading wide to create a canopy of dappled shade, and the creek still ran clear and cold over smooth stones. The graves were well maintained, marked with flowers that Violet planted fresh each spring. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked, his hand clasped in hers. "That day when I found you, if you could go back and change things, would you?" Violet turned to look at him, at the man she had built a life with, and shook her head. "I would never wish for my father's death or the pain of that day, but I cannot regret what came after. You gave me a home when I had nothing, loved me when I was broken, stood beside me through every joy and every sorrow. How could I regret any of that?" "I was so afraid you would leave," Nathan admitted. "Those first few months, I kept thinking you would heal and move on, go to California to find your aunt or back to Santa Fe where you had roots. The day you agreed to stay and work on the ranch, that was the day I started to hope." "I think I knew even then," Violet said. "I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. My father always said that life would take me where I needed to go, even if I could not see the path. I think he would be happy knowing that the path led me to you." They stood there for a long time, watching the sunlight filter through the cottonwood leaves, listening to the creek and the birds and the distant sounds of the ranch. It was peaceful, this place where grief and love intertwined, where the past and present met. When they finally walked back to the house, they found all three of their children waiting for them with grandchildren in tow. Noah had married a woman from Springerville and had 4 children of his own. Grace, though unmarried and devoted to her work, had adopted 2 orphaned siblings who she was raising with fierce love. Samuel and his wife had just welcomed their first baby, a little girl with Nathan's green eyes. The evening that followed was full of food and music and laughter, of stories told and retold, of children running through the house with the boundless energy of youth. Violet sat in a rocking chair on the porch with the newest grandchild in her arms and watched her family with a heart so full it ached. Nathan came to sit beside her, his hand finding hers automatically, and together they watched the sun set over the ranch they had built together. The sky turned gold and pink and purple, the colors so vivid they seemed almost unreal, and Violet thought about that day 25 years ago when she had stood in the desert dust with nothing left but grief. She had been willing to give up her mother's ring, the last precious thing she owned, to honor her father. And Nathan had wept at her sacrifice, had refused to take it, had given her dignity and hope and eventually love without asking for anything in return. It was the kind of story people told around campfires, the kind that reminded them that goodness still existed in a hard world. But for Violet and Nathan, it was simply their story. The story of how they had found each other in the midst of tragedy, how they had built something beautiful from pain, how love had transformed them both into better versions of themselves. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Violet thought about her father's story of the constellations, about people who lived good lives becoming stars to watch over those they loved. She looked up at the brilliant points of light and felt a sense of connection, of continuity, of peace. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether she was speaking to her father or to God or to Nathan or to all of them at once, she could not have said. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "For what?" "For everything," Violet said simply. "For finding me that day, for giving my father dignity. For loving me. For this life we have built. For all of it." "The pleasure has been entirely mine," Nathan said, and the smile he gave her was the same one he had given her on their wedding day, full of love and promise and hope. They sat there together as the night deepened, surrounded by family, blessed by love, living proof that even the darkest moments could lead to light if you were brave enough to believe in the possibility of joy. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and rain, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its mate. It was a wild and beautiful land, harsh and unforgiving, but it was theirs, and they had made it home. Years later, when their grandchildren were grown and having children of their own, when Nathan and Violet had passed into memory and become stories told around dinner tables, people still spoke of them with reverence. They spoke of Nathan Northwood, who had refused payment for a good deed, who had wept at a woman's sacrifice. They spoke of Violet Northwood, who had lost everything, but had refused to lose her dignity, who had built an empire from grief and love. But the story that was told most often, the one that became legend in that part of Arizona, was the story of how they met. How a cowboy had come across a woman in the desert dust, how she had offered him her mother's ring for her father's burial, how he had refused to take it and had given her everything instead. It was a story about sacrifice and nobility, about recognizing value beyond price, about love that grew from the seeds of tragedy. And always, when the story was told, the teller would hold up a ruby ring, passed down through generations of Northwood women, and say, "This is the ring she offered him. This is the ring he refused to take." And because of that choice, because of that moment of grace, a love story was born that changed everything. The ring would catch the light, the ruby glowing like captured fire, and the listeners would nod and remember that some things, the most important things, could never be bought or sold. They could only be given freely, with open hearts and hopeful hands, in the faith that love would find a way even in the darkest of times. And in the grove of cottonwoods where Violet's father rested, where Nathan and Violet were eventually laid to rest beside him, the wind still moved through the leaves with a sound like whispered blessings, and the creek still ran clear and cold, and the stars still shone overhead, watching over the living and the dead with equal tenderness. The ranch continued for generations, each new steward honoring the legacy of those who had come before, each one learning the story of how it all began with tragedy and sacrifice, and a cowboy who had understood that true wealth could never be measured in gold. They tended the graves, told the stories, passed down the ruby ring, and kept alive the memory of a love that had transformed two broken people into something whole and beautiful and enduring. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all. Not the ranch or the land or the success they had built, but the proof that love could heal, that kindness mattered, that choosing dignity over profit could change the course of a life. It was a lesson worth preserving, a story worth telling, a legacy worth fighting to protect in a world that often forgot the value of such things. The desert kept their secrets and their sorrows, witnessed their joys and their triumphs, and held their stories safe in the red earth and endless sky. And somewhere, in the space between memory and legend, Nathan and Violet lived on, forever young, forever in love, forever walking hand in hand through the cottonwood grove where it had all begun with 3 graves and a ring that represented everything and nothing all at once.